Aabria Iyengar, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk with us here at TechRaptor. Burrows End has just wrapped as of when this will be going live. The season is over. It was terrifying. So I want to ask, before we get to the end of it, I want to talk a bit about kind of the conception of the idea. Where did the writing for Burrows End begin? Did it start with the idea of a family of stoats, or did you build it around like a set piece or a theme?
I definitely tend to be a theme first kind of writer. We had joked for like a joke came up in a photo shoot about what if there was like a cyberpunk watership down that was just like a bit between a couple of us that I definitely was like, oh no, I'm taking this personally because I think there is something inside of like Watership Down talks about the things that we value and fear in humanity through the lens of animals, which is how we like teach children what it means to be human by making cute animals do it. And then Watership Down, of course, being like extremely traumatic and horrifying and graphic. But again, all those things you can be when you're talking about rabbits, not about people. And then obviously, like cyberpunk as a genre comes out of a lot of like economic and social fears in America in the 80s. So like moving from that, I was like, cool, it's something about like fear and what it means to be human. And taking that, like that was the like heart inside of what Burroughs ended up being, and sort of pivoting to like what are the things we fear. I think we fear like a personal loss of agency, which is where a lot of the like undead themes and like exploitation themes that pop up in different ways came into being. And you know, like the sort of like political fears now about like ideologies and like what are thresholds for like authoritarianism and fascism, like what is the level of governmental behavior at which we go this far and no further. And I think the sort of nebulousness of that point is a point of anxiety in people now, that you're like, it feels like everything's getting worse, but like at
Mm.
what point do you do something like en masse about it? So playing with those ideas and those themes, then you go back and say like, cool, let's talk about like exploitation cycles. It can't be little vegetarian bunnies running around the world. Like I want them to feel closer to the things that we are afraid of in humans. Let's make it a carnivore, but still kind of cute, which is how we get
Mm.
the stoats. And then when you talk about that, like the sort of us versus them of it all, that's why I think it was so important that like we played around a very tight knit unit. So it ends up being a family. And again, I didn't come into our session zero saying like, you guys all have to play family members. I sort of said like, you guys are all from the same warren and you are very close in that there are 40 to 50 stoats in this warren, and you all know each other and are all vaguely related when you think about like how closely related animals like that would be, but feel no pressure. But they came to being this family unit on their own, and I was like, great, we're going to run it, like we're going to like run out the gate with this very strong interpersonal sense of like us and all the tension that comes from like family things that are very real and grounded that they absolutely excelled in. And I'll keep throwing external pressures that
Mhm.
like there's a lot of stuff built in that like you can see the DNA for that we didn't really dig into, of me trying to chip away at their family unit and really playing inside the like what external pressures can blow up a tight knit unit, and how do you as a group expand your understanding of who us is. So that's where all of that came from.
And when I spoke with Jasper after the first two episodes, I did ask him about his position on dice superstitions because, at one point you guys were cheering for mediocrity.
Yes.
um, as the GM leading the story, how important do you think the idea of dice tells a story was to the growth of the family?
Oh, look, I think there's something so beautiful about like if dice and the ability for this like external randomizer, if that wasn't important, we would just be doing improv. Like, and there's nothing wrong
Mhm.
with that. Just about everyone here has done a buttload of improv. That's great. but they're like, once you acknowledge and surrender in some way to like the dice will influence this game in ways that like support and uplift and blow apart intentionality and player agency. Like the moment you like surrender to that, the moment you go like the dice are a character, the world, it has its sort of say in this story too, even beyond what me as a player in the GM might want. So I love the phrase the dice tell a story. I believe it with my whole heart because it's that ability to roll with the punches that makes for like moments of transcendence, like when you get the nat 20 at the exact right time. Talking a little bit about the finale, Rashawn's perfect. I was like, well, that's the coolest thing in the whole wide world. I love it when we're all on the same page and I'm talking to the dice too, but it's also just as fun to lean into the misery of having like just a terrible rolling day and like turning that into, okay, the dice aren't here in the story with us. So how do you justify inside of you like these low rolls? And having, gosh, Jasper is such a brilliant player and came into the dome and did so much on a freshman effort. Like, dang, he is fearless and just so flexible and brilliant to like take all of that as like, I am a cult leader. I'm very good at people, but these roles don't agree with me. So what does that mean? It means that my standing within this family has never been as like solid as my standing with strangers. It means that like all of these things that I have been told I can do and I should do and I must do, those rules don't seem to apply here. So I have to find my new position. So we had this beautiful character going through a very vulnerable arc within the context of his own family to then come through and triumph at the end. And again, going back to the finale, having him in his epilogue be our sort of like diplomat out to the world, that once again comes back and confirms like, yeah, you were a cult leader for a reason. You're a leader for a reason. This was always in you. And you could only come back to it at the scale that like changes the world once you dealt with like whatever's going on within the like ecosystem of your family. It feels like such a personal arc that paid off in the end. And there's something really nice about trusting that whatever the dice did isn't ruining your story. It's helping you tell it and just rolling with those punches. So good.
And we saw the bear, terrifying, and
Yes.
Phoebe, even scarier. We've seen you run Ted from EXU, and you're already back in the horror driving seat with Candela Obscura, Tide and Bone. Is crafting tales of horror something you've always had a passion for, or just something you've grown to love over the years?
I have always loved horror. I'm definitely one of those kids that saw like Alien way too young, where my dad just had it on TV and I was like, what's this? And then the chest burster scene happened and I think I just kind of turned and threw up.
Fell in love.
Yeah. And I was like, that was horrifying. More please. And I do sort of like, not to lean into the Jordan Peele of it all, but I do think that there's something really, really close between comedy and horror. Both of those use surprise and like expectations that are subverted to bring about like a big emotional reaction. And whether that's laughter or whether that's fear, you are sort of driving the same sort, like it's the same patterning once you kind of get it down. And I think there's something like fun and difficult in the brief of like, how do you scare the table? How do you scare in a way that is like sensitive and safe the players? And then how do you scare the audience who isn't here in this intimate moment? So it becomes, yeah, I think I've always loved horror. And then recently I've become fascinated with how to execute on it in this form, because I am obviously obsessed with the form of like actual play and narrative play and like RPGs as a storytelling art form. So yeah, it's been fun.
So we can expect more scary tales from Aabria.
Yeah, I'm not done. I got lots of stuff I'm scared of. We can do this all day.
Now, you had an interesting dynamic with Erica as Ava as the game went on, as she was doubling down on the unwillingness to learn, as well as the discovery of hats.
Yes.
In RPGs, a lot of people say it's all about yes and, but what do you think the ingredients are to pull off a really good no but?
Yeah. Uh, so with Erica, there's always, I mean, there's something about having a person that you're like, this is like my best friend at the table. And just in general, that you're like, a lot of the like playful friend banter is going to slip into this interaction.
Mhm.
So, like, the power dynamic of a GM to a player adds a different lens to it. But at the end of the day, this is two friends that are just giving each other a hard time of like, hey, everyone's learning to read. What do you mean you don't learn? Okay, roll about it. Okay. Okay. So you're just not going to learn. Okay. So now I've seen that this became a bit, and now you're making your whole personality about it. I love that. So now we're going to keep playing this. So it was very fun having Ava as like deeply resistant to that kind of change within the walls of Last Fast. That like is a one deeply funny bit. And the dice were really like, we're in her corner. We will not let her learn. She simply cannot know. That was really fun. But also, Erica's a brilliant storyteller and understood that like the thing within Ava resists this kind of change most of all. Their time within LastPass, their time across the story, saw them leveling by two quite frequently every couple of episodes, especially as they got closer and closer to the Elephant's Foot, the Corium under Phoebe's heart, that like double-sided battle map. That
Mhm.
like, of course, Ava would embrace all of the like powerful like physical growth markers that come from this experience, but the mental stuff, like the thing that she feels the most insecure about, being not very emotionally intelligent as a like character, she would be deeply resistant to that. So that felt like a bit, but also in the hands of a like expert storyteller, is also telling you something really important about the arc that Ava's going through as this sort of like generational trauma embodied within a stoat holding a raccoon dick bone, which is again crazy but brilliant in the right hands. And then everything with the hats, again, a delightful bit from our session 0. But it was one of those fun things where I was like, cool, you guys have decided, might think that this is just Aabria having like a weird hill to die on. But because I knew that we were going to eventually have them meet the like stoats of Last Bast,
Mhm.
where the general stoats had like little bits of like stripped hazmat suit that they were using as sashes. That was the beginnings of clothes. But the first stoats, the ones who saw humans and interacted with them and had the most access to human technology, they had television and books, so they were able to see Joseph Stalin and model after that, and were able to see the coronation of a pope in 1963 and modeled themselves after that. They took on so much more of the like what it means to be human. That was like cool. If you have never met a human, why would you want clothing? Because all of those things, like gloves make your claws less effective, hats make you hear less. Putting on physical clothes, like stoats, with the exception of Tula dying quietly in the snow, don't need clothes to defend themselves from the elements.
Mm.
So where does the impetus for clothes come from? That's a thing you learn in proximity to enough other stoats or people that have already figured that out. So it was a lot of like a bit up top, and then as you get the reveal of the like DNA of Last Bass, you understand that like, of course you couldn't have clothes to this point, but now
Mhm.
go buck wild. And that's just going to serve this sort of like, what does it mean to be human theme that we've been moving towards all along.
The battle with Phoebe was quite quickly turned against her with some impressive saves and an unlikely stoat with a gun.
Yeah.
Um, what was the process behind designing that encounter, and were there any actions or lair actions that we didn't get a chance to see?
Ooh, what a fun question. Um, yeah, the table rolled incredibly well. I think the biggest little turn I had on deck was my desire, because we had had two stoats within the party that had died. Uh,
Mm.
if they had rolled poorly on those saves, they would have become combatants under Phoebe's control. And we would have seen them have the same undead problems, like that loss of agency, the sort of final fear. Like when we talk about horror games and the things that you're afraid of, if you say that like inside the D&D world, death isn't the end, because there's an afterlife and people come back from it all the time, because we have like several spells that bring people back from the dead. That like there's something inside that like you can come back, but what if you come back and the agency isn't there? Like, what if you don't get to be you anymore? I think agency, more so than life or death, is an axis that like horror turns on in Dungeons and Dragons, the way that it's built. So playing with that a little more would have been delightful and fun. I had dreams of the trade-off you would get, that like if you fell under Phoebe's control, was that you got sort of a half level, and I had cards in the back of like new things that they could do that they would use against the party until the party figured out how to like bring them back, or they rolled well enough to like regain their agency, and they would have kept that like extra kit as a like, thank you for being a bad guy for me for a little bit. As a parting gift, here's this new terrible thing you can do. So we never really got to interact with that very much, but it was very cool and fun. That, yeah, all of that was built to just sort of play the like, now what have you learned across the last 10 episodes? Like, the environment is made of people. Like, yes, our like half of our like combat is this people / environment. There are people in the corners, but you can crawl across them and move across them. You can exploit them. So much of the story has been about how humans exploit things and how stoats exploit things too, both as like people being sort of a stochastic parrots of human behavior, but also what stoats do by their very nature. So you can do more with this environment if you want. And there were lots of little like things that could be lifted and interacted with, that they had chosen to sort of interact with the fight in different ways. Like, you could try to take over a person, you could try to like telekinetically move a lot more stuff in the scene around, but the way it went down was just so brilliant and perfect. Speaking of all the other things that were built in, is very kind, but I wouldn't change a single action from a player, because it was just so good.
We had a chance to hear about each character's epilogue: Lila becoming a world-renowned scientist and Jason becoming an Olympic long jumper.
Yes.
Makes total sense. For the other hero of the final battle, Lucas, where do you think that his life ended up? Was there a Stoat ENT that he could finally visit?
There's got like, that has to be it. I have to believe with my whole heart that Meredith, for all of her like nastiness from that group interaction, probably once she was no longer tasked with being like the like weapon specialist here, was like, I could learn to deal with some like ear, nose, and throatness, and really bent the course of her life to helping her son breathe properly. I like to think that once he was able to breathe properly through his nose, Lucas, our little bard, became just sort of an exemplary musician within Last Bass and like Stoat society. I want to throw him out like as kind of a prince-like figure. I think he's kind of a playboy, plays a lot of instruments, makes a lot of great music. So yeah, that's what I want. That's what I want for him.
That's it. You get your nose fixed and suddenly you're a player Stoat.
There you go. Big pimpin'. Go off, Lucas.
Moving to the double-ended battle board, the Reactor Charlie, which was a simultaneously terrifying and enlightening puzzle for the Stoats to solve. What elements do you think that lends best to a puzzle in an RPG?
I think there's a difference between RPGs that you play at home and the ones that you're like playing for an audience. I think there's always that like that fear when you're on camera of like, great, now be smart. Now you're playing a character with a high int stat, but that's what your character does. Like, are you also smart? I think there's like a weird fear around that. And that was part of the reason that we gave everyone like little sample puzzles too, so they could work on it in the event that like the single player brain cell took over the group and they were struggling to solve it. There were lots of things built in that would keep the puzzle part of that adventure from going too long. But of course, in a scene that like someday I hope we release, Brennan and Siobhan specifically walked into the dome, saw the puzzle, stared over it motionless like gargoyles, and then we're like, I solved it. And I'm like, great, it wasn't.
Did it.
Hey, bud, it wasn't that hard. It's specifically 6 moves away, so it could be handled within the terms of a normal flow of combat. But like, I am very proud of you, and you did a great job.
Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah, it's so good talking
You
to
know,
you.
so excited to continue to get back to watching you in Candela Obscura.
Thank you. Oh gosh, my little monsters.